Hello, everyone, and welcome to my first ever Unmatched Strategy guide video. This time looking at Little Red Riding Hood, my personal main. Um, First of all, her basic stats. Little Red is a move 2 melee fighter, which is usually pretty bad, can lead to some issues with fatigue, but we'll get to that later. 14 HP is below average. Average is just about 15.4 right now. She has a ranged sidekick with the Huntsman, which is great. Huntsman is really beefy. 9 HP is the highest in the game that we have for a single sidekick right now. I know Oda has two different 6 health sidekicks, which kind of get out to 12, but we'll ignore that for here. That makes a total health pool of 23, which is above average. And great. So you have a good survivability and board control with two bodies, one of them being ranged. And also you have 12 unique cards, which makes the deck really consistent. But let's talk about the ability. The ability says, resolve an effect on a card you play if the symbol next to the effect matches the item in your basket. At the start of the game, place Little Red's basket in your discard pile. Well, that should be confusing to anyone who is not familiar with Red, because, conditional effects, symbols, a basket? What are these? We'll get to that. Um, this is the card that was talked about before with Little Red's basket. This starts in your discard pile, and it helps you to keep track of your symbols, which is on top. And it says this starts in your discard pile. It does not count as a card, but it counts as any one symbol. So you start with a wild card in basket. But what exactly means that? Well, we'll have a look at that because Little Red's cards have small little symbols attached to them just below their name. Um, You have four different symbols on your cards. You have the flowers on the left, then pelt, knives, and a wild card. And effects on your cards only resolve if the symbol next to the effect is in your basket. So, for example, if we take a Grimm Tale right there, it says Little Red recovers 2 health, but if pelt is on the top of your basket, Little Red recovers 4 health instead. Same goes for What Pig's Eyes. It says also ignore the value of your opponent's card if flowers is on top. So this is kind of Red's gimmick, and we'll take a look at that. Conditional effects are not great because that can lead to blank cards if you have a bad deck order. So you have to plan a few turns ahead for your symbols to match, and it creates kind of a mini game in the actual game. But if you're able to resolve the symbols, then her effects are above average. In your deck, you have 8 flowers, 9 pelts, 9 knives, and 4 wildcards, 5 if you count the basket that you start with. So it's really consistent, and it's evened out with a simple spread, and wild just helps if the deck order is bad. So let's start with some little red cards before we go to Huntsman cards and then the any cards. And the first card is probably one of the most fun and my favorite in her deck. It is What Large Hands You Have. It's a 2-value attack, which says after combat you may return this card to your hand, and then if Flowers is on top, instead you may return the top card of your discard pile to your hand. Okay, that's a lot to read through now. First of all, 2-value attacks will usually not deal any damage, which is not great, but you can recur this card back to your hand every time. So it technically wastes a defense. So you play this card, your opponent plays a block card, you take this back to hand, they lose their card, you don't, which is great. And then you're always able to keep up pressure with this card because you can always attack and attack and attack again. So it's great, but also even more great to deal with 1 or 2 health sidekicks because they won't really defend often most of the time. So you're basically able to kill them for free because you don't spend a card. But that's not the only thing this card has, because you can recur other cards, which we'll talk about just in a second. And it's a 3 boost, which is nice if needed. You don't typically want to boost with this card, but it's fine, I guess. So let's talk about the recursion. These down here are the 5 cards you can recur with hands, and we'll just go through them. Basket recursion in general is great for more wildcard symbols. That means more effects. Um, you can recur more random discards, which is always great. 3 auto damage recursion. I don't think we have to talk about that. And 2 or 4 heal recursion is conditional, but still great. The only one you don't really want is the movement recursion. It can help, but it's not great. So here we have the recursion tier list for large hands. Just don't recur move, and everything else is great depending on the situation, basically. But yeah, we'll get to the other cards later why they are so good. Next up we have what big ears you have. It's a 4 printed value attack, and it says if knives is on top, you may play this card as a defense card. Now, 4 value attacks are good. They are like, they usually will deal 1 damage, if not max value block. However, that this has basically no effect and it's just a blank 4 is not great. But you are able to play this as a block card, and it can help you in pins because usually red struggles when getting pinned, but this is just an extra option if you don't have any actual defense cards. This can help as a 4 value block, and 4 value blocks are great. If you, however, attack with this, you want this to get fainted because red has so many great effects that are like really bad if they get fainted. For you, that this is just like the perfect feint bait. It's a printed 4, so it will deal 2 damage over the feint, and there's actually no effect to get cancelled, so your opponent will feel really bad, and you'll feel really good if this gets feinted. Then, next up is the card that kind of holds the deck together. What's that in my basket? It's a 4 value versatile, little red only, with a boost value of 3. Um, just like before, 4 value attacks are good, 4 value blocks are great. Sadly, no effect again, but the wildcard symbol makes up for that. So this allows you to really get some good symbol chains. And this being a 4 copy card is great to see in red stack. So you will have it very often. You're likely to get it in your opening hand and change some symbols. And just like years before, you want this to get fainted. Just like the reason before, this has no effect. Your other effects are really good, and you don't want them to get fainted, and you feel really good if you deal 2 damage over the feint with this. And just like before with hands, more 3 boosts are great, more mobility, but you're feeling not too happy if you have to boost with a basket. The next is probably one of, if not the strongest card in the deck, being what big eyes you have. It's a 3 value versatile card that says immediately cancel all effects on your opponent's card. And if flowers is on top, also ignore the value of your opponent's card. That's a lot. So first off, 3 value cancels are great. That's basically a versatile just your imagination from Bigfoot's deck. 3 value cancels are just overall great. But then you can ignore the value of your opponent's card. That's just like an impossible to see from Invisible Man's deck, but in better because it's a 3. And it's 3 guaranteed damage most of the time if this doesn't get fainted. So what you typically do is you attack with this because you have so many other great block options, and this is just 3 guaranteed damage, so it's better used on offense. But sadly, there are only 2 copies, but the threat of this card is always huge. So what you tend to do is when you have flowers on top, you can maneuver in and attack with something like a basket, because your opponent will probably expect this card. So you deal 2 damage over the feint, and then you feel really good, and this card is still in play. So I would usually keep the second copy of this at least in my hand and wait to play it until later in the game, except if it's like extremely crucial to get the 3 damage in. Because usually, if there are no more copies of this card, your opponent doesn't really care if there's flowers on top and you attack them, because there's no other good card to attack with any good effects than this. So often the threat of this card existing is just more valuable than playing it, which just makes this card even more scary. Next up we have What a Terrible Big Mouth You Have. It's a 2-value defense card, little red only, with a boost value of 2, and it says, after combat, if pelts on top, deal damage to the opposing fighter equal to the printed value of their card. So first of all, 2-value blocks are not great. The effect, however, is massive. That's huge auto damage potential, and usually will resolve in a HP trade. For example, if Bigfoot comes in and smacks you with a log, you will take 4 damage, which is not great. But then after combat, he will take 6 damage in return. So if you have the HP to spare, try to play this against high printed value attacks and only printed values, because boosts or shift bumps and stuff like that don't count for this card. It's only printed value. So this is huge auto damage potential on your turn, which on your opponent's turn, which means they have less time to react to it. So for example, if Bigfoot maneuvers in, attacks you, and you play this, then after the attack, Bigfoot doesn't have another action to react to this, and he just lost 6 HP, and then this might just win you the game. So this is a really, really good card, and this is one of the cards that your opponent wants to feint on offense. So the thing with red is that often it's better for your opponent to offensive feint her than defense. Because on defense it's always like a mind game, what will she play? But on offense it's mostly that red will just play something like a mouth to deal you more damage. And like I said, if you offensive feint this, it's better for you because you wouldn't have any time to react to it otherwise. However, if you defensive feint, or actually you don't, um, then probably red's turn will end there, and then you can react to whatever effect she got off. So offensive feints against red are really good, and you have to be aware about that if you want to play this card. Next up, we have a little red only scheme, being Never Leave the Path with a boost value of 1. And this is a tricky card because it has 3 different effects, which only resolve if the given symbol is on top. So if Pelt is on top, you place Little Red in any space and gain an action. If Knife is on top, you deal 2 damage to each opposing fighter in Little Red zone. And if Flowers is on top, you draw 3 cards. So we have many versatile effects, and choices are always great, because most of the time you can choose which effect you want to have, because you gotta set up your symbol before, and if wildcard is on top, you actually can't choose. Usually the damage option is best, because 2 damage to each opposing fighter is just huge auto damage, and it's really good to get rid of one of sidekicks, and if you even hit 2 different opposing fighters, this is really great value. Also, it's a pass, and passes are always great. Um, Also, your opponent often doesn't really think about the other 2 effects, because damage just gets picked so often that you might surprise them with a tiny little draw 3 cards, or you warp around the map with Pelt. So that can catch your opponent off guard, and that can lead to some funny interactions. Also, this is your only way in the deck to escape pins reliably. Of course, you can always try to kill your opponent and then escape, or just pressure them so much that they have to run away, but this is your only guaranteed way, because you place her in any space and then gain an action if Pelt is on top. And that can be useful in some matchups like Raptors, although I would never recommend you to play red against Raptors. Um, but it can come in handy sometimes, and it can lead to some funny surprise attacks. And also, the Thing is a thing. I don't know if you ever heard of the Thing as Little Red. It's basically on maps where you can reach the starting zone of the opposing fighter on your first maneuver. It's that you maneuver, sometimes even boost with a knives card if it's so good, and then you just deal 2 damage to each opposing fighter in her zone. So what this means is, since you are in the zone of the opposing fighter, um, they also have their sidekicks in their zone. So you will deal 2 damage to every single one of them. This can be really good against fighters like Yennenger, where you get in her zone and then just deal 2 damage to her and kill off her archers. Or Robin Hood, where you deal 2 damage to him and all outlaws are dead. So you have to be aware of that if playing as or against red, that the Thing is a thing. Next up, we have Into the Woods, which is a scheme card for Little Red only, and there are 3 different copies because we have 3 different symbols and there's 1 symbol on each of them. So first of all, it says move Little Red up to 3 spaces and gain an action. So move 3 is always great for a move 2 fighter. It lets you chase your opponent a bit faster and you gain an action, so it can lead for some this can lead to some great double attacks. Um, Sadly, it only moves Little Red and not Huntsman, but it's a great setup card because you can play whichever Into the Woods you need. If you need Pelt, you play Pelt one. If you need Knives, you play Knives one, and stuff like that. And then it's just great setup to get your next attack with a symbol you want to have. Then next up we go over to the Huntsman only cards, which first we have Long Have I Sought You. It's a 4-value printed attack with knives for Huntsman, and it says during combat, if the Huntsman is adjacent to the opposing fighter, the value of this card is 6 instead. Wow. So first of all, just like we said, 4-value attacks are good. Yeah, but then if Huntsman is adjacent to the opposing fighter, it's basically a lock from Bigfoot. It's a 6-value attack, which is huge. That's almost always 2 damage into the opposing fighter because if they feint this card, it's 2 damage over the feint because this is a printed 4. And if they max value block it with stuff like Skirmish, it's still 2 damage over that because it becomes a 6. So this card is just great for Huntsman, and it's also a good setup to defend him afterwards because the main cards you want to defend with as Huntsman require knives on top, which we'll talk about later. So this is just great if your opponent goes in on Huntsman, you can punish them really hard with this card, and then get away again and have a good defense ready for him. Also, if Huntsman should be dead already, this is a good boost card, being a boost 2 with knives, to set up knives on top. And in some matchups, like Robin Hood, for example, it's great to kill off one half sidekicks, like the Outlaws, because this can also be thrown at ranged. Don't forget that. Most people are like, Huntsman, he wants to get adjacent with this card. No, it can be thrown as a ranged attack, that being then only a printed 4 with no effect, but hey, it's still printed 4, and stuff like Outlaws will just die from that. So that's a thing you need to remind, but yeah. Okay, so next up we have a Huntsman only scheme, being a Grimm Tale with a boost value of 3, and it says Little Red recovers 2 health, and if Pelt is on top, Little Red recovers 4 health instead. Now, just like we said with Never Leave the Path, a pass is always good. A pass, just small explanation here, being a scheme that doesn't draw you any cards or gain an action. So 2 healing for red is always great. That makes her effective health bump up to 18 if you play both copies of this. But if you get the actual effect from it with a symbol, then it's 4 healing for red, which is ridiculous. Like if you play both copies of this, red has an effective health pool of 22, which is bonkers. That's higher than She-Hulk, that's second only to T-Rex, and it's ridiculous. Red becomes so tanky. Um, a 3 boost is also nice to have once Huntsman is dead. And this card often is the main reason why your opponent wants to kill Huntsman, because they usually will go for him first, so you don't get to play this card and heal red. Because if you heal 4 or even 8, if you play both of these, then you're in a really great spot and your opponent will usually not have the damage to kill red off. Then next up we have the Annie cards. First up being Stones in the Belly. It's a 2-value versatile, and it says during combat, if knives are on top, your opponent discards one random card. Add its boost value to this card's value. Now this is probably once again one of the strongest cards in Red's deck. It's basically a 2-value ambush as a versatile card, and that's massive. Random discards, how we know, can change games. If you hit something like a beast form from Dracula or anything else, a big reveal from Houdini, that can change games. That can win you games. It's the best defense for Huntsman. It's the only defense for Huntsman where he can defend for more than a 2. Um, it's usually a 4-value block or attack because like the average boost value in the game is 2. So this is just great block card. If you get this, it's almost better than a Hiss and Slither from Medusa because it gets a 4 block, but it's not chosen discard but random. And 3 random discards per game is great. If you recur this with hands 2 times, it can get up to 5 discards, but I would usually just think about it being 3. And you want this to trigger almost every single time. There are some occasions where you even take an attack undefended if you would otherwise have to defend with this with a wrong symbol. Because if you defend with this as a blank 2, you feel really bad. So usually what red tends to do is attack with something like How Long Have I Sought You with Huntsman and maneuver away so that this card is online. And like I said, it's the greatest defense you have for Huntsman, and you feel really bad if you can't use this effect. Same also goes for the next card being Once Upon a Time. It's also a 2-value versatile any, and it says after combat if knives are on top, deal 3 damage to the opposing fighter. 3 auto damage is ridiculous. That's 6 auto damage just from this card if you play it 2 times. Auto damage being effect-based damage, so it ignores your opponent's card value. So if you play this against something like a skirmish, it will still deal the 3 damage even though skirmish is a 4 value and this is a 2. So 2-value blocks are not great. So mostly use this on attack. It's not like stones where it can bump up and is great defense. This you will probably more often use on offense. Although if you have to defend with it, it's still good because most of the time, if your opponent doesn't play something like a lock, it will still be a favorable trade for you because you still deal 3 damage to them. And it can be used from range with Huntsman, which is great. Just like with stones, you want this to trigger every single time because this card and Path alone gives you 10 auto damage in the deck. And then you have something like Big Mouth, which usually will also deal 2 to 3 damage every single time. So just by landing these few cards, a game can be won. So you feel really sad if this gets fainted, or you have to play this suboptimally without the effect. And then the last card we're going to talk about is the Wolf Skin, being a 2-value defense card, any, with a after combat effect that says if Pelted's on top, draw 2 cards. Now, 2-value blocks are not great, just like we said, but it's your only reliable card draw except for Path. And just like we said, you don't really want to use the draw 3 on power most of the time, but it can happen. And usually this card you will only play it 1 or 2 times per game because drawing too much cards can be bad in Fatigue. But it's great to keep up hand advantage, can make red really aggressive if you combine this with some hand attacks. You can just really pressure your opponent down, and it's a good boost to set up knives in basket, just like how long have I told you, because if you draw too many cards, it will usually be bad for you, and this with have this having knives just gives you a good opportunity to do that. So in conclusion, Little Red is a great fighter. She has a ton of auto damage. She often deals more damage on defense than on offense, actually, which is really funny because your opponent is disincentivized to attack her, but they often have to because her symbols are just so great. And she has 4 passes. If they don't go for Huntsman, you have 22 HP. So she's just a menace, and her powerful and versatile effects basically give her a chance in any matchup, almost. There's some ones that are like still almost auto lose for you, but if you get all the symbols right, you almost have a chance every single time. And Huntsman is just a Giga Chat. He's one of the best sidekicks in the game and should be protected at all costs most of the time. Like if you already played his cards, then yeah, you can let him die. But if you get all of these cards off, red is just a menace. So your opponent will always go for Huntsman first, and you have to protect him. So at the end, just want to talk about the card tier list for red, just in my opinion, and of course, these cards can change on how useful they are depending on the matchup, but usually your best cards are what big eyes you have and stones, because they're just random discards and ignore value, which are incredible good. Then basket and once upon a time at the top of A tier, just 4 value wild card and 3 auto damage, always great. Hands to keep up pressure and recur stuff, 6 value attacks. Then mouth for the defensive auto damage, path being versatile. Then B tier we have ears, which is 4 value attack or block, which is good. Then the Huntsman scheme for healing. Yes, normally this would be S tier, just from the card itself, but trust me, you will rarely get this off. So from the useful card, it's not that great. It's a great threat for your opponent, and your opponent has to think about it, but you rarely get this off. So it's B tier. And then on C tier we have the schemes, the Into the Woods, which are like good, but nothing more. And Wolfskin also there, just for the card draw. And lastly, I did a small matchup tier list. This, of course, is just my opinion from the experiences I had with Red and playing against these fighters. I've played against every single one of them. But of course, there can be some luck or bad draw on some of them, and I haven't played every single one 10 times or stuff like this. So don't rely on it every single time. It's just for you to kind of know where she's good, where she's not. And feel free to disagree or prove me wrong in the comments. Um, we have the almost free win tier, just like it says. It's almost a free win for red every single time because of all of the auto damage and your opponent not really having the chances to get rid of Huntsman early. Then we have the red favored ones, which are like 55 to 60% win rate for her, in my opinion. So you can feel really comfortable playing her into these. And then the even ones, which are like classics, like the Yin and Yang matchup, they can go either way, but red definitely has a good chance. The slightly bad ones are, just like it says, slightly bad. Red still has a chance to get these, but it's usually a favorite for your opponent, and you'll have to get some good interactions there and some good symbol chains to actually make them work or even. And then we have the don't even try it. Trust me, don't try it. It's not great for her. But yeah, thank you for watching. First of all, shout out to Baked Goods who also made a red guide before. I know that, but this is my first guide video, so I wanted to start with the character I'm most familiar with. Um, so feel free to write any feedback and suggestions in the comments regarding the video, what I should do next, which character you want to see, what I should improve on the structure of the videos, because I will try to upload a new guide every single week from now on. And yeah, until next time.